We hear a lot about Scrum as a tool to change the world. But perhaps maybe Scrum isn't changing the world. Maybe the world is changing Scrum. And maybe we're all responsible for that. Maybe we're all participating in this. Perhaps the ability to change things in meaningful ways is right under our nose, and we just need a little more courage. So this is something that I want to discuss with you this morning. This is the diagram we all know about for Scrum. It's a very simple diagram, very familiar diagram, and we know this diagram. But this is what Scrum actually manifests or generates. It tends to generate a candid honesty, a kind of brutal examination of the facts. Sometimes we would rather engage in polite conversation than a frank discussion of the facts. Scrum doesn't really tolerate this and prefers that we are, honest with each other and with ourselves. Scrum drives radical improvement in results if it's implemented properly. And so, Jan, I need your help now. Wait, maybe if I get closer. Yeah, that's it. So what is this? What is Scrum? What is this thing? Scrum. What is it actually? So here's a picture of a person in black and white. Does anyone know who this man is? Let me give you a hint. He invented random access memory. He left computer science in 1959 saying that, quote, most of the major growth is now behind us. Here he is a little older. This man is a professor at MIT. And he actually invented system dynamics. Does anyone know this man's name? I have a prize for you if you know his name. Okay, this man is J. Forrester. J. Forrester pioneered the use of system dynamics to map and describe the structure of social systems. And in 1998, he, giving an address in Seville, Spain, called Designing the Future, he said these things. He said that a time is coming when there'll be a profession of social system design. And these designs will structure policies so that the people in the systems and the systems themselves will better serve the people. Okay, does this sound like something that we were familiar with? Social system design? Here's what else he said. He said that the design of social systems will become a legitimate profession. Then he went on to say that the current state of the art in social system design as a profession and as a domain is basically where, other sciences were, let me get this going, 100 years ago. So roughly 100 years ago, where medicine was and where engineering was, that's where social system design is today. So we are right on the edge of a whole new era in the science of sociology, social system design. So how many people here have any engineering background at all? Show of hands. All right, that's a lot of people. So in social system design, we want to keep that engineering hat on. We want to continue to function as engineers because it turns out that social systems are designed systems just like Scrum. Here's what else he said. Generic models are those to apply to many different settings. That sounds like Scrum to me. So Scrum is a social systems design. It's a design for people. So if we work in this business, here's what we end up with. Success in solving complex problems, exciting and engaging work, consistently great results, and genuine progress, right? These are all the things that Scrum can provide to us. But It must be implemented properly. If it's not implemented properly, we actually have no shot at any of these things. So, what are the trends and opportunities ahead of us in the current day, in the here and now? We're in the here and now, what's in front of us? And what's in front of us is this notion of business agility. This promises to literally triple the demand for Scrum. This is actually, we're right on the verge of this right now. There's a whole sense that agility can be applied beyond software, and pretty soon a lot of people are going to understand that Scrum has everything to do with that. The next one is the accelerating pace of change that's driven by technology, by cell phones, by the World Wide Web, by all of this interconnectivity. Some of the best friends I have, some of whom are organizers of this conference, I met them online. That would have been literally impossible before 1995. So, here we are. We also are facing problems that are actually planetary in scope. These problems are solvable through empiricism, which is not just in Scrum, but it's also a philosophy that learning by doing in short iterations is the best form of learning. And Scrum is uniquely designed to solve these problems now. And finally, there's building demand for people who have a deep understanding of empirical systems like Scrum. So each of you who are working in Scrum today are actually in a position to lead people into the future. This is actually what's happening here, So Scrum is a tool to change the world? Yes, that's definitely true. But we must guard against the world changing Scrum, or we'll just become part of what, the very problems we're trying to solve. So, here are the three big things I want to discuss with you today. The first one is something called Open Business Agility and 8 Patterns of Open Business Agility. I am going to offer you a hypothesis that business agility is literally impossible without leadership picking up some new and difficult and somewhat awkward patterns. The next thing I want to teach you is something called the inviting leadership style. Leaders routinely delegate responsibility. Sometimes that comes with the authority necessary to exercise, sometimes not. But in this segment, I argue and offer you the idea that leaders must mix in a few invitations with those delegations. Invitations generate about 1,000 times more feedback than a delegation. And if the world runs on feedback, the empirical world, then perhaps invitations are a better approach to leading people and process. And then the last thing is Scrum at Scale. Scrum at Scale is actually not the future of Agile. It's actually the future of work itself. So those are the three big ideas that I want to bring to you this morning. Who am I? I am a guy that lives in the USA. I've been using Scrum since 2006, and I've written a few books. I've trained a lot of software developers, like tens of thousands of software developers in a previous iteration of my career. And software developers never wanted to know about your resume. They don't want to know about your many accomplishments. And they definitely don't want you marketing to them before you teach them something. So because of that, I'm in the habit of just skipping over my resume, which I will now do. Okay, so have you experienced any of this? We've implemented Scrum, but the leadership team believes it's not really useful beyond software. Actually, it's only for engineering. Anybody here ever experienced this in their company? Yeah? Okay, there's a few hands. How about this one? Before we've implemented Scrum, but for some reason, before we started, we never really did examine, discuss, and then agree to the rules of Scrum. And I have no idea why. Anybody ever? Show of hands. Anybody ever implement Scrum without getting the Scrum guide out there? Yeah? How about this one? We've implemented Scrum, but all the decisions took place behind a closed door. None of us actually had any input into the process, and it was, quote, rolled out. And now we have illness. And some of us are not happy. Ever experienced that? Yeah, okay. So, we've implemented Scrum, but not the decision rights. The events, the artifacts, and the roles, yes, but the decision rights, no. And nobody actually respects the decisions of the product owner because our product owner is a kind of committee. Is this familiar to you? Yeah? Okay, so there's a show of hands and there's this sheepish, I saw some people going like this, like maybe your boss might be in the room, might be sitting right next to you, so I completely understand. Okay, so in our sprint planning, others advise and suggest what goes in the sprint, and these others are not on the team. Ever seen this one? So what this is the implementation of Scrum without the decision rights. So I am going to offer you the hypothesis that Scrum is a prefabricated system of decision rights, where decision rights are distributed across 3 roles. And if you implement these decision rights, you actually will get genuine progress. Later on, I'll explain how 10 or 15% improvement is possible without implementing the decision rights at all. That's actually the problem, because a lot of organizations are happy with 10 or 15% improvement in everything we're measuring. And we don't have to change any of the decision rights. See the problem here? So we're settling for much less than what's possible. This is actually what's happening. Here's Martin Fowler discussing the state of Agile. The first 3 quotes, the first 2 quotes are from his essay called The Agile Imposition. Is anyone familiar with this essay? Show of hands, anybody ever seen this essay? Okay, very few people have seen this essay. Martin Fowler is an Agile Manifesto signatory. I'm just some guy, but this is Martin Fowler, the signatory of the Agile Manifesto, and he said, imposing Agile process strips the team of self-determination, which is at the core of Agile. And he said that imposing Agile methods introduces a conflict with Agile itself. He said this in 2006, some 13 years ago. The entire industry ignored what he had to say. Then, in 2018, he gave a keynote at the Agile Australia conference. And in the 3rd quote, he said, imposing methods on people is an absolute travesty. The word travesty means a cruel imitation or a mocking. And in the 4th quote, also in his 2018 keynote, he said, we should focus on fighting this idea of imposing practices or process, Scrum, on teams. So, why isn't Scrum realizing its potential? Why is there so much poorly implemented Scrum? It has something to do with decision rights. Why? The answer? This is my hypothesis. We are afraid. We failed executive leadership because we are afraid. We're afraid to explain to executives what is required to distribute decision rights and get not just 10 or 15% improvement, but to get 100% improvement, a 200% improvement. This is all possible very rapidly, but it's going to require a very candid examination of the truth. And that's what Scrum invites us into. So, the link between great results and engaged people and decisions needs to be explained to executives. And before we start, they need to understand that Scrum requires them to distribute the right to make certain decisions. And that if these decisions are not actually distributed across these 3 roles per the Scrum Guide, then we can expect 10 or 15% improvement. And if you're happy with that, great. But if you want 100%, you're going to have to implement the decision rights that are described in Scrum. So, I want you to think of Scrum as a rule book or a kind of game manual that describes who decides what. This is a quote from the Scrum Guide. For the product owner to be successful, everyone in the organization must respect his or her decisions. I would like you to turn to the person to your left or to your right and discuss this as implemented in your organization. And give it a grade, give it a rating, give it a score of 1 to 10, where 10 is perfect. And 1 means it's like really like messed up worse than your last experience of airline cuisine. Okay, so take a minute and do that. Go, turn to your neighbor and discuss your organization, and then let's find out. We'll read it out after. Okay, so we're going to move very quickly now. Normally I count this down from 1 to 10, but let's just do this very quickly. How many people in this room can rate their organization or the one they serve as a coach or a Scrum Master higher, a 6 or higher on this ranking right here, on this statement? 6 or higher, show your hands. Okay, look around. Look at how many are 6 or higher. It's not a lot. Maybe 10%. That's about average. Most of the crowds that I ask this, about 10% of the hands go up. So worldwide, we have 10% implementation of this rule, this decision rights rule. Now, here's the reality. If you implement the roles, if you implement the artifacts, if you implement the events, and do not implement this decision right for the product owner and other decision rights as defined by Scrum, you will still get 10 or 15% improvement in everything you're measuring. So if you have a daily meeting, if you have sprint planning, if you have a demo, if you have a backlog, you're still going to get this 10 or 15%. That is the problem. The business world is settling for 10%, and so are we. This is a kind of crime because 10 times that is right under our noses. Okay? So I want you to, when you look at Scrum and someone asks you what it is, I want you to tell them that it's a prefabricated authority distribution schema. That's a technical term for saying that it describes who decides what. That's what it actually is. Most of the rules in Scrum are about who decides what. Scrum decentralizes decision rights in service to improving the flow of value. There's no other reason to do it. If you don't want to improve, don't use Scrum. We can do better. Scrum decentralizes decision rights in service to improving the flow of value. When you're deciding, you are engaged. Have you ever noticed when you're not deciding, you're not engaged? When others make decisions for you, there's a word for that. There's a description for that. There's a term for that. Here's what it's called. Boring. Right? It's called boring. And if taken to extremes, it leads to something called learned helplessness. This is where you learn that everything you do doesn't matter because other people decide. And then you stop caring. And pretty soon you stop trying. And you just become an emotional zombie. Do you know what I'm talking about? Right? You're chuckling because you've been in the zombie state at least once in your life, and I have as well, when I was like 7. I was a troublemaker. We will soon be finding other troublemakers in the room. We will identify them shortly. So, everything today is complex. The decentralization of decision rights is the way to deal with complexity. To speed up decisions, you must decentralize them, put them closer and closer to the work. We all know this, but we don't do it. We don't explain it to executives, and we don't ask them to understand. Instead, we implement the roles, events, and artifacts without the decision rights rules. And not everyone is happy with the decentralization of decisions that Scrum requires. Some people that make decisions today will do everything in their power to make them tomorrow. That's a big problem. And many of these people who make decisions, by definition, are in authority. And they have people who report to them. And if you're in authority and you don't like Scrum, and I report to you, and you have me by the performance review, maybe I don't like Scrum either. Can you see why? So this is what goes on every single day. I've already discussed this 10 to 12% improvement we can get by implementing Scrum without the decision rights. That's a huge problem. So deciding turns out to be very engaging, and Scrum distributes decision rights for that very reason. The reason why the team in the sprint planning makes the decision about how much goes in the sprint is to engage them. Because decisions are engaging, and engaged people are productive. So I'm not saying the teams need to make every decision in the company. What I'm saying is they need to make some minimal amount of decisions if you're going to get the full benefits of Scrum. Scrum describes the decision rights. It's important for us to keep them. So now I want to kind of show you the stack. If you're making decisions, that leads to engagement. If you want to engage employees, invite them to make some decisions that affect their work. That will immediately engage them. And oh, by the way, there is a mound of data from the Gallup organization dating back 30 years, over 30 million data points, that associate employee engagement with every good thing, including higher stock price, better morale, better attraction and retention of top employees, and so on. So deciding turns out to be engaging. Engagement is good. When you're engaged, you start to self-manage those decisions. So self-management, it's distinct from self-organization. Self-management is a kind of self-organization, but it's the management of decisions. It's the leadership function. Okay? When you're self-managing, when you're engaged, you have a higher capacity to sense and respond, and as soon as you have that, you have better results. So this is basically the stack right here. It starts with decision making. Okay, I'll take a moment. Some of you are taking pictures. Okay, so what I'd like to do is discuss this with you. If we discuss Scrum, this is a direct quote from the Scrum Guide on page 7. When the values of commitment, courage, focus, and openness are embodied and lived by the Scrum team, all the good things come to life for everyone. So I want to talk a little bit about 8 org-level patterns of agility, and I want to talk a little bit about leadership. Leadership is, you're a leader if you're involved in any aspect of decision-making that affects the group. So you're a leader if you are here, or if you do this, or if you do this. If you influence decisions, you're a leader. If you make decisions, you're a leader. If you participate in decision-making, you're leading. When those decisions affect other people, you are leading other people. So apparently, leadership is all about decisions and who makes them. So to open up decision-making, to decentralize decision-making, you need a special new kind of approach. Executives are properly afraid to open up decision rights because they don't have these patterns. They don't understand these skills. Clarity of authorization, the use of communication protocols, an empirical approach like Scrum. They know nothing about this. Common knowledge, the idea that you know that I know that you know about what's about to happen. Like this talk ends at 10:20. We all know that together, don't we? That's a shared agreement. Common knowledge. Common knowledge is spawned by whole group process. So getting everyone in the room is essential to building common knowledge. We need to get all the people in the room before we begin these implementations of Scrum. If we're going to do enterprise-level Scrum, we need enterprise-level whole group process. Get everyone in the room. Worldwide, that's not happening. The decisions happen behind closed doors. That's not only disengaging, it doesn't tap the collective intelligence of the whole group or gauge the group's willingness to proceed. It's actually foolish. Boundary management. Without boundary management, you have nothing. If you look at what goes on in Scrum, Scrum has very clear boundaries, and we might say that the Scrum Master is the boundary manager. Okay, so Scrum embodies a lot of these principles. Explicit agreement, we talked about the socialization of the Scrum Guide. We implement Scrum, but nobody agrees to the rules ahead of time, so how can we hold them accountable to anything? That makes no sense and actually doesn't work. We must get agreement on the rules and everything else about Scrum before we proceed. And the primary tool is leadership invitation. The idea that you can invite people, the people are volunteers, and that they can leave. Okay, so we might call these open patterns and practices. Here's how that looks in a diagram, those 8 things all in a diagram. I'd like to discuss those with you. Here's what we have in typical organizations. All these anti-patterns, all these dysfunctional behaviors. We've all seen them. Many of you are smiling. Some of you are elbowing each other. Here's what solves that. The 8 patterns. That's the antidote. So, for example, the antidote to imposition is invitation. The antidote to closed-door decisions is whole group process. You see where this is going? Yeah. So these are the 8 patterns that we need to teach leaders. When we do these 8 things, they can safely and pragmatically distribute decision rights and get it done. Okay? So we need to teach the executives about these guardrails, how to implement them, what's required of them to maintain these things, and so forth and so on. Okay? Okay, so inviting leadership. Inviting leadership is fundamentally respectful of people and their boundaries. Respect is a core value of Lean and a core value of Scrum. If inviting is respectful, then inviting is 100% aligned with Lean and Scrum. Okay? Now, here's Jeff Sutherland in the book, The Power of Scrum. Telling, in this business parable, the coach is telling the implementer, do not force it on the team. Let them make their own assessment, or it won't work. And here's the same book where the coach is saying the leader's responsibility is to make it clear to the team that they are in control of their own work process. Okay? So we need to teach leaders this. Scrum, did you know that Scrum is a game? Did you know that? It's actually a game. And it's actually fun to play. But you can't play unless you agree to all the rules. Otherwise, you're not playing in the game. So Scrum is a game. Games have rules. Games also have, good games have opt-in participation. So I want you to think of Scrum as a game that describes decision rights. It's the decision game. Thank you, but hold your applause. Okay, so good games have these 4 things: goals, rules, and a way to track feedback. If you want to have a good meeting, I want you to make sure the meeting has these 4 properties in a very strong sense. Okay? Forcing Scrum or anything else is a very dumb idea. Inviting leadership, basically it's this thing right here. I showed you this diagram before. At the bottom of the stack is receiving invitations. Why? Because every invitation is an invitation to decide. When you invite, you get into the person's head. They're thinking, what happens if I say no? What happens if I say yes? What will I learn if I go? What will I miss if I don't go? This is decision-making, and it drives engagement. So if you really want to get in someone's head, invite them. Scrum at scale. I think you know how this works. Jeff's talked about it quite a bit. It's 125 teams. Now, let's have an exercise. Let's make some decisions. There's 3 things that we're going to talk of that I'd like to talk more about in the next 20 minutes, 15 minutes. But I want you to drive that. So here's the deal. I want you to pick from these three things. What do you want me to go further with? Would you like me to go with the 8 practices of open business agility? Would you like me to talk more about inviting leadership concepts? Or would you like me to talk about Scrum at scale? The rules are that you can vote for all 3 if you want, but I need your feedback. So what I'd like you to do is turn to your friend and discuss these 3 things, and let's find out what you want to do. Okay? Go ahead and tell me where this keynote is going. Go ahead. All right, so the moment of truth has arrived. How many want me to show more of Scrum at scale? How many want me to show more of the 8 patterns of open business agility? Okay, that's a lot of hands. And remember, you can vote early and often. You don't have to vote just once. You can ballot stuff. How many want me to see more, want me to talk about more of the inviting leadership material? Okay, so that's a lot. Now, how many of you want me to just stop right here? No hands at all? Okay, there's one. Keep that hand up. Is there another? Is there anyone else who wants me to stop right here? And further, go back to Connecticut where I came from. Show of hands. There's one hand in the back. All right, so let the record show. This is a troublemaker. This is a dangerous person. Watch out for him. Okay, he's trouble. Okay, so let me in the next 10 minutes just run down some things for you, okay? Very, very quickly. It sounds like the business agility patterns are interesting to you. The inviting leadership stuff is interesting to you. I'm going to go very quickly through the stuff and understand that I will not only send you the slides, I will send you supporting artifacts and PDFs that will deepen your learning about these things. I'm just introducing you, okay? Thank you. And I trust the leaders, JP and Jan and Elisa and Peter and the whole team will totally support this because they're here to serve you, which is what the whole vibe of this conference is about, which is why I love to be here. So let me go very quickly through some of these things now, okay? So here's the 8 patterns. Let's go through them very quickly. You saw this pattern already. These are the anti-patterns. These are the antidotes. Now let's go through them. Here's the 8 patterns. The first one, clarity of authorization. If you're not clear what you're authorized to do, then you have to constantly ask. That's waste. So, in the world of continuous improvement, you know exactly where you stand in terms of what decisions you can and cannot make. Okay? Second one, interaction protocols. When international leaders of countries go and visit each other, they actually use protocol. Why? Because when leaders of countries misunderstand each other, wars can occur and people can die. For this reason, we use protocols. In the emergency room, they use protocols. Why? Because if they don't communicate clearly, then when you go to the emergency room, you could die. Okay, it's the same exact thing when we're making large, irrevocable decisions. We need to use protocols. So protocols are a very vast topic, and it's structured interactions. They are absolutely essential to high performance. Okay, so what we're asking people to do when they implement Scrum is actually be high functioning at the level of organization. This is a tremendous challenge. Protocols help. Okay, the next one, the empirical approach. This is Scrum and any other empirical approach where you learn by doing. The empirical approach features frequent iterations of experimentation and learning by doing. That's what I just did in asking you for feedback. That's what you do every day in your job if you're a good Scrum person. Empirical approach when in times of complexity is absolutely the way to go. Next one, common knowledge. This is the idea that you know that I know that you know something. Like this keynote is over in 6 minutes. We all know that. You do this by getting everyone in the room, by using whole group process. This is something that's completely lacking in the Agile community today. We implement enterprise-wide transformation, but we don't get everyone in the room to discuss how exactly that's going to go. This is actually a crime, and it's also ridiculous in a really bad way. So it's like a dark comedy. Ritual is an extremely powerful way to build common knowledge. Getting everyone in one room is an extremely useful way to build common knowledge and whole group process. Boundary management. You could think of Scrum as a boundary management system. The boundaries are on the boundaries of authority to make decisions. For the product owner to be successful, everyone in the organization must respect his or her decisions. That is a clear boundary defined in Scrum. Good fences make good neighbors, David Frost said. Now, each one of these domains is an entire universe of learning. I'm just running them down really quickly for you, okay? And I'm going to send you artifacts in details, okay? Last one is clear agreement. If you don't agree, nobody can hold you accountable to anything. Maybe that's why we implement Scrum without actually socializing the Scrum Guide, because nobody wants to be held accountable to anything. Maybe that's part of the reason. We don't know what the reason is, but clear agreements actually reduce waste because repeated negotiation is waste. And then finally, leadership invitation. My favorite. Open methods of leadership and process favor a pull-based approach rather than a push-based approach. Now, around the world, we all express the virtue of pull. Pull is beautiful, pull is good, pull is virtuous. Pull is like love. You can't make someone love you, you must pull them into loving you. Right? You can't mandate love. You can only offer an invitation. This is pull. But around the world, push is used to implement a pull philosophy. Think about that for a moment. Isn't that just the most ridiculous thing you've ever seen? So, only 3 minutes to go. I wrote a book called Inviting Leadership. It published in December of 2018. This is the cover. It's not a new idea. It's actually a very old idea. People do what they're willing to do. People do what they want to do. So maybe what we need to do is identify some areas of concern and find the passionate and responsible people, the ones who really want to do this. I'll leave you with this last thing. Around the world, formally authorized leaders are delegating responsibility, but they often are not delegating the authority that's needed to actually exercise. That's the same as disengaging people, right? So when you delegate responsibility, you had better be very, very sure that you delegate the authority to exercise. Because the delegation of responsibility without authority is called tyranny, mandate, imposition, use of force. All these bad things happen under the outcomes heading. But if we add the delegation of responsibility with authority, then we can get high engagement, we can get great results, and we can avoid the risk of resentment. Did you ever notice the highest performing people have really low tolerance for being imposed upon? And you know what they do? They loiter by the exits with their resume when they smell something. So when you delegate responsibility without authority, you're going to lose your best people. What happens when they leave? Number one, you lose a great person. Number two, that great person markets their resume to your competitor. It's a double-barreled negative. And number three, a potentially great champion has just left the building. A champion of change has just left the building because we've killed their enthusiasm by delegating responsibility without authority. Okay? So we're right at the end. I need to go all the way to the end. I need to skip through 87,000 slides. And now we're almost at the end. And now we're almost at the end again. And now we're at the end. There's one more slide I want to show you. That's and I really didn't plan to have this beautiful, serene scene, but maybe we can do a meditation. I'm just kidding. Could you bring that back up? Yeah, this is the last one. This is what I want to leave you with. Get clear agreement about Scrum. Socialize the Scrum Guide. Make sure people are going to honor the decision rights that are defined there for the product owner, for the Scrum Master, for the team. Secondly, demonstrate and explain the Scrum decision rights to executives and ask them if they really want to do this or not. Because if you want to do legitimately great work with Scrum, you have to implement the decision rights. Are you willing to settle for 1/10 of what Scrum offers? Or do you want to take a shot by explaining to executives what's required of them concerning these decision rights as defined in Scrum? I want you to teach the 8 patterns of open business agility, and I will show you and give you tools to do that in the artifacts that I send you through the organizers of the Scrum Day. And lastly, I'd like you to learn Scrum at Scale, because Scrum at Scale is not just the future of Agile. It's actually the future of work. Thank you.